If you are interested in creative writing and how that can be a therapeutic activity, and if you are a therapist looking to integrate writing or narrative therapy into your practice, this is the episode for you. I'll be interviewing counselor Nick Kondyles on his methods of utilizing creative writing for his own creative endeavors and therapy, and also integrating it into the psychotherapy process. Nick is a therapist serving the Grand Rapids, Michigan area, as well as the entire state of Michigan via telehealth. Nick's specialties are in anxiety, depression, relational issues, and identity exploration. He works with adolescents and adults, as well as the LGBTQIA community. He is also interested in serving those experiencing grief and loss, substance use, career development, and employs interventions such as legacy life review and visiting issues like work-life balance. Nick endeavors to serve those parenting or dealing with relationship struggles, providing and supportive services such as learning different communication skills and others in the interpersonal domain. All right, I'm sure you're going to enjoy this interview and learn a lot about literature and creative writing. Let's get into it. Welcoming Nick Kondyles, a licensed counselor, to the podcast to talk about creative writing and the mental health benefits of it. Thank you, Nick, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, my pleasure. So, I know that you are a creative writer and a therapist, so I figured maybe we could jump in and ask you first, what got you interested in creative writing?
Yeah, so since a young age, I was read kind of a traditional to lead to bed before kindergarten, and I wouldn't even say like such a well-read household, but it just became something I really loved to read, and I grew to be a writer, I guess I would say, in high school, right? And I just kept writing. I would say slowly began to write books. I wrote 3 of those, but kind of moved away into the short form in college because there's a lot of workshopping, and usually that was like below 20 pages and short stories. And I always say become a poet through pain and slowly, right? From the short fiction to the nonfiction, and then eventually moving to short form like that. But I really do love both reading and writing equally, but I would say it's always a trade-off for sure, but of how much I do either. But I would say there are definite like parallels that are very much interesting. I was as interested in psychology, mental health from high school and then definitely college. I knew I wanted to be a therapist of some form on a subconscious level, but not until, it was my master's degree did I fully commit to that. But yeah, I see some weird parallels that we can get into between that are also interesting parallels, very helpful parallels between writing and counseling and mental health for sure.
Okay. Yeah, well, it sounds like you've been interested in both for a while. So tell me a little bit just about creative writing, and maybe just we'll get to more of the nitty gritty of what you like to do with creative writing and mental health. But let's talk about maybe, like you said, like some of the kind of the stats or whatever you were kind of alluding to about how maybe it could help you or help anyone really.
Yeah, for sure. So with creative writing, I always believe it's a recursive process. This is just from my own experience, but no matter what it is, like even if you take something as bland as a dictionary or a car manual, that's still technically writing, right? But it's more of like content of like how to do something where there's some sort of message being communicated, and whether we like it or not, we're in conversation, right? We're not apart as writers from the world, we're of it, but writing is a thing you have to do in a room, like if it's about like commitment to a larger form, but it's also about observing the world and seeing the world. And I think which is really interesting about talk therapy is we're in dialogues with each other, and we're very much in the verbal narrative. And I think with writing, it's like a physical thing where we have these thoughts and ideas and feelings in our head, and that's not a good place for them to be. It has to go somewhere. And I think for some people it's art, for some people it's maybe athleticism, but for us it's writing. And they always say the tools of the writer are the most bare bones, right? It's just, unless you're doing it on a computer, it's just paper and pencil, right? So you're very restricted in your tools there. Just very similar to being a counselor, and a doctor or surgeon at least gets a scalpel, right? But we just have our words, right? So it's very similar to being a writer in the sense of, just a pencil in hand and blank page. Some people, like school projects, like that's really triggering. Like you don't want to look at the blank page and not have anything on there, right? Then you get what's called writer's block. But this whole sense of like, we have to get that shitty first draft out there and we have to just make something of the world. And it's something they call it the talent of the room. It's this idea of like that you have to sit and actually commit to this thing. And whether that what that thing is not clear, but a lot of times it's dialogue first.
Okay,
But it's
so
in
just
conversation.
committing and sitting to basically take whatever is in your mind or in the world around you or your
Yeah.
experience and then using paper and pen or which
Yeah.
I've heard is
Or
easier to write than a computer for some people,
yes, for sure. For
or
sure.
it's less distracting, I suppose.
Absolutely.
um,
Absolutely.
then kind of just putting things down there, kind of putting yourself out
Mhm.
there, putting
Yeah,
things down there is kind of like a step that you would say could possibly be
for
therapeutic.
sure. Absolutely. And the research does, and we'll definitely get to that. But when I was in college, I always like to give this anecdote. We had a lot of visiting writers when I was in school, and I loved hearing from them. But it was the first writer to really challenge my perception of the starving artist and the really neurotic writer who must be full of all these issues and these psychiatric maladies, and actually talking about mental illness as being prohibitive to his writing, and that he had to buy himself an Olympia typewriter because it was in the age of before even smartphones, but just in the, it was around that age of like, I did have a computer. It did it not only distract me, but it riddled me with my anxiety.
Mm.
And that malady was not helpful for his writing. And I was really curious about that. So I followed up from an email. I was like, yeah, I don't know what you've heard, but mental health diagnosis for me has just as me as one writer has been prohibitive. And that's a really interesting thing because I always heard of it being conducive, going hand in hand. You think of the Ernest Hemingways or the Van Goghs of the world, right? You think of a very successful,
Hmm.
like, okay, that's a good thing. I should have these certain maladies in order to like almost like a formulaic thing that can become kind of toxic. But I've thought long and hard about this, and I think it gets good. Pretty well known that anybody in any profession has certain maladies, right? So it depends. Like I think there's some sort of famous fanaticism with like kind of like a morbid interest in those kind of maladies, but or like
So
psychiatric
like Hunter
diagnosis,
S.
like being
Thompson and Ernest
right.
Hemingway having both completed suicide as writers, is that kind of,
Exactly.
and David Foster
Exactly.
Wallace, is that kind of what you're saying? And like
Exactly.
people have a little
Exactly.
obsession
Yeah.
with that, and you're saying that that
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily have to be the case. They just happen to write a
Exactly.
lot of content and then decided to complete suicide, which was devastating to a lot of writers and the people that knew them,
Yes.
right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We know Sylvia Plath and Virginia Woolf and like no end to those names. And it's a very unfortunate truth, but it's also there's so much anybody can do this stuff. And I was actually just hearing a podcast by Emma Watson who had played Hermione Granger and then she was saying like and she was almost reading my mind of like, oh, well, everybody thinks this and writers nowadays, like they think it's narcissistic or they think like, who wants to hear me? Who wants to hear your voice? There's all this content right now, right? Who's going to read? But the thing is, people do not know what they don't know, so they don't know you. They need your voice. They need your plays. They need your songs. They need your poems. They need all these things. We just sell ourselves short with that core belief of that. Who wants to hear from me? And that is the biggest writer's block of all, right? That's the biggest thing. That's the biggest thing I want to bring across is it's not about what you make, it's the fact that you're making, right? And that's the talent of the room. That's the presence of it all. That's the mindfulness. That's being present. That's being still. That's what the world maybe does not want right now, doesn't want to sit still. And so I think there's so much content, right? And it's not about creating more content. It's about just expression, I think. So I think
Okay,
that
yeah.
the world needs your voice, and that really inspired me in that way.
So I like that concept of the world needing our voice, and the idea of the stillness of sitting in a room and then working on something until you present it to the public who, as I have heard, of course, that's the other side of it, is the reading side. There are
Yes,
countless studies that
exactly.
I don't need to quote on this podcast because it only takes a Google search or an AI search, whatever you utilize, to find that if you say the mental health benefits of reading a book are immense because people feel less
Exactly.
stress. I heard that there's like a cardiovascular benefit
Yeah.
to reading books. There's a mental health benefit to reading books.
Mhm.
There are kind of like meaning, like people's existential meaning comes alive when reading books and reading a variety of different types of books. Plus, education revolves around reading books. It can improve your life. People say that the more books you read, can actually, depending on your vocation, can actually make you better at certain vocations because you're more in touch with different perspectives. And in business, people say the more books business leaders read, the better their businesses do. These sort of things. So
I'm so glad you brought this up.
It's the reading, right? And you're writing for possibly yourself or possibly to present to others. And I know in creative writing,
something I also weave into my practice a lot is this idea of bibliotherapy, reading and therapy.
yes,
And it doesn't matter what you read, just that you read, right? And I think I definitely know the research supports this, that it's safe to say reading and writing are effective. To what end quantitatively, we don't know. We just know that it is effective. But, really great study is a study done by Pennebaker on therapeutic journaling. But yes, definitely reading a book is a safe and accessible physiological and psychological way to definitely discharge some of that. But I think when you're writing or you're creating in general, you are discharging some of that matter. And of course, that's a drive reduction thing. We know that just like exercise, we need to get some of this energy out as humans. But in the therapeutic journaling study, there was a group of college students who conveniently he had been doing studies since he was like, I want to say, don't quote me, like 86 to 90 years old, research. And he had done so many studies. And after this particular study, for some reason, anecdotally, like the college students would approach and say, this is one of the top 10, not just research, but experiences of their life, right? And one group in the control group, as we know, is the group away from the experimental controls, like wrote about something mundane, like their college dorm or something just like really seemingly mundane or boring, which there is writing for that. But then some wrote about the most traumatic or severely, extremely affecting emotionally in a negative sense, experiences of their life. And that group obviously did had a lot more long-term benefits longitudinally, which means following them across their life. So the power of that, we know there's power in it. We just don't want to quote how much power. So like some people make full recoveries from thing. Every individual is different. Some individuals, like I'll give you an example. Like I used to say this too, but like, oh, I'm not an artist because I can only make a stick figure. Like you don't know, like it just doesn't matter what part of the art you're doing, of the art world, just that you step into it, because that's what I fundamentally believe is that every human being is fundamentally creative, whether you're a physicist or like you commit yourself to being an artist, right? So there's a big spectrum of who this could fall under, but I believe it includes 100% of the population, of course.
Right. So
I'm radical about that.
Yeah, I like that. So we can see from that one study that it improved people's health outcomes.
Yes.
Just by expressing yourself. And that goes along with a lot of mental health studies where if people hold in their true feelings or thoughts, that there has been a correlation with negative health outcomes versus talking
and another
about their
thing I
truth.
wanted to delineate too is there's three things we want to delineate, right? And so that's the journaling study. So therapeutic journaling is, we should definitely make a differentiation. So there's therapeutic journaling, which could be just bullet points. I mean, usually in the VA, they delineate more of a structured thing of like, and that usually has to do with PTSD or so like trauma recovery, but it could be anything. It could be an anxious experience you had. It could be your day bullet point, because some people have starting the day for their kids. They might just put bullet points and write about it later. Creative writing, as you know, with music, Paul, there's like a proliferation of genre. It could be there's new journalism, there's memoir. For the first time in 1999, the memoir genre outsold fiction, which was monumental with the book Angela's Ashes, and Glass Castle and all these. So we're in an age of memoir right now. So people writing about their life, the pain, and great art comes from great pain to discharging that. So it's about how much you want to commit. Journaling, of course, is for the person's meaningful experiences and meaning making. And journaling can be a whole lot of things, but I think there's definitely a Venn diagram of intersection with creative writing, but obviously not the same. And then we have this whole thing going on with content creating and AI and all this stuff. And what does that really mean? I think it means that we don't know, right? But we know that art is going to look different, and just like music and all these things, they're not. It's not going to go away. Just like when we thought that with Kindle, that people wouldn't prefer books, but the data didn't lie in publishing. People preferred physical books for a long time when Kindle came out, right? So it's like some things that you expect technology to take over doesn't exactly happen the way it is, because we are fundamentally meaning making and artistic creatures. I think that's what, anecdotally, at least that's my perspective. But I'd be curious your thoughts on it, Paul.
Yeah, I think that It depends on the person and their personality. I definitely think technology has taken up more people's lives, but like everything, I believe it has limits, right? And it also depends on how much people are willing to be introspective. I would say that oftentimes consumption of technology could be used for anything. I mean, it can be used to be introspective. It can be used to stay away from ever having to look at yourself and just continually consume information and talk to an AI robot. I think that it does come down to making meaning, and writing can help people make sense of their lives, like the journaling, the memoirs, talking about your truth. I think it really comes down to the person and their culture and where they're at in the world, and how they were raised with technology, what their exposure was to technology, and all of that. So what are some tips for people that want to get into writing? I think that was kind of where I wanted to go. And then kind of further, secondly, what you would do as a therapist. But let's go with tips for people that want to get into writing.
Yeah, I think a great one that I use is this just write one thing today prompt book. And so I think if there's something that writer's block is something you experience, like, oh, what do I write about? Or if like I said, great art comes from great pain. So if you had like, I actually, Ethan Hawke, what an actor, just come out with something where he was saying like, yeah, people aren't the modern person isn't particularly interested in poetry. And then, your grandfather dies, or like the person you loved, you thought they loved you, they don't love you anymore. It's like, it's very like, distinct modes. Like you can't not discharge that somewhere. You can't not express yourself somewhere. And I think writing is a really good avenue for that. And talking with your therapist about that. I think a therapist, I can't speak for all therapists, but most therapists would be more than willing to read their client's work if they're like to share it, right? And that's always a beautiful moment as well, to be able to be a part of that creation piece. And a lot of that is the verbal narrative too, of like submitting to things can be toe this line between life of scarcity and life of abundance. Life of scarcity says, well, there's only really 4 trade publishers and bookstores close every day. But life of abundance would say there's no end to workshops and groups, and people are still writing. And writers are our own unreliable narrators. So like we're our own worst enemy in that sense of like, if we don't connect, if we don't share our work, we're just going to crumble it like Stephen King did in Trash, until his wife unfolded and said, no, you really have something here, right? So having that's why it's conversation. That's why it's dialogue. That's why it's community, because time is not our friend, like community is. And I think sharing your work. And I think part of that could be therapy. I think in therapy, it looks a little different because we're already changing that oral narrative, which is where writing started, was in ancient times, right? We would get around, we didn't have the written word, we had tablets and things like that, but oral tradition is how history started. So I think that's why I say writing is still language, because like even when you're like physically writing, like it's still that kind of conversation. Like again, whether it's like a dictionary or like some sort of novel, like that's still content, right? So that's still something being communicated to the reader.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I'm thinking about that. At the same time, people like to make declarative statements, and there are bookshops closing, but there's also bookshop.org, which has sponsored
Right, for sure.
millions of dollars, I think, at this point,
Sure.
to book
That
and
is
mortar
fantastic.
bookshops by ordering online. $42 million.
I highly recommend. I shop there myself. I love to use their,
Yeah.
there are a lot of options in our literary community. I meant in the sense of like people discourage themselves from putting themselves out there, their work out there.
Oh, I agree
And
completely.
there are always those options.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of say like that's when we need to maybe resist what is being sent to us. Like reading AI slop is not the same experience as reading something from a human being. Right.
Absolutely,
So
always.
bookshop.org has supports over 1,900 bookstores. It's climate neutral certified B Corp. They give 80% of their profit margin to independent bookstores. So that way, and you can see the list of bookstores that they do, that they help essentially with the rent and the overhead of the place, because a lot of bookstore owners, independent bookstores, cannot afford their own location they have to rent from a landlord, and so this is where we're at in the world. And I think it's a
Yeah,
very important thing to get involved, because a
for sure.
bookstore is a place where sometimes writers have workshops and they share
Yeah.
what they've been reading, or
And
a book
book
club.
unveilings,
Right.
and they're publishing their book and they get to read from it. It's a really awesome community staple. And Books and Mortar, if you're in the local Grand Rapids community, everybody, I couldn't recommend them enough. There as also as well as Schuler's books and those sorts of things if you would like that. And there is, as long as you're buying books, like that is, or giving back to the writer in that sense of like, there is that life of abundance still for sure. And I think some of the counseling is perhaps in conversation with is like narrative, existential, strength-based, and also trauma-informed counseling for sure.
Tell me more
We're
about
huge
that.
trauma.
How do you see that with therapy and your
Hmm.
writing? Like, when does one
For
take a
sure.
client or suggest a client do writing that's beyond journaling?
Absolutely. I think it's about meeting people where they're at with the exit in the existential meaning making sense. Like writing is meaning. And I think it can be profound in that way. And if, especially if someone's always writing, and maybe writing is the course of the core of the neurosis because that's their identity, and they're feeling very discouraged or that they're not necessarily like writing something of meaning at all times because it is a very inconsistent thing. It's kind of like the muses sing and the heavens open and you have your piece there, right? But a lot of
Hmm.
times you're editing and toiling that the writer doesn't want to look at it, so it's hard to disentangle themselves. Maybe they're in the editing stages, so it's about so there's probably two ends of the spectrum: someone who doesn't write at all or thinks to write it all, and someone who is writing almost to the point of toiling, right? The point
Hmm.
of like, kind of that tortured artist sense in that sense. And it definitely happens. And it's about looking at the assets of that and the strengths of that and definitely tearing away from that. It's like, hey, could I be that other perspective? Could I be that other person for you right now? And that willingness and that consent is key there for sure. And I think it goes in hand with bibliotherapy too. If like the thing that we tend to be social comparison creatures coming from tribal cultures, so I think there makes sense that we would compare our work to others, and even though no work is like our own, right? Because we're our own individual, right?
Right, and it
But
can. And
yeah, it's about
I was wondering
encouragement
if you
too.
think writing can help people not only with meaning, but to establish a greater sense of themselves and maybe what they want in
Yeah,
life by putting it on paper, and kind of, it's like your brain sees what you wrote on paper or what you typed up, and it regurgitates it. So it's like kind of like going through another filter to go, oh, that's kind of what I was feeling, or that's what I was thinking, right?
absolutely, Paul. And I think it can has no ends to benefits for self-confidence and for self-identity, especially like, it goes into like Erickson stages a little bit too of that whole identity and role confusion of like certain stages of our lives too. Of like, I think if you look at like really extreme examples like Bukowski, right, of like writing about the most like I don't know, like out there territory of like that we don't talk about, but I think he's similar to how Larry David runs his show of like the misanthropic point of himself that is not really who he is at his core, but trying to get it out onto the paper. And I think that is part of identity too. Is they play with that. It's playful. Writing is playful. Like it's not supposed to be work. It's a task when you don't leave time for it. But it's at the root it's supposed to be playful. When you go to an art piece and you go to an art show, it's like that person had some fun there. They didn't necessarily. They also it's their work, so there's playfulness elements to it. So it's very much toiling. There is work to it, but I'm trying to get at the playful core of it. That's what I think could also work with that identity piece is like when you're having play with it. Like you do moves to still. We imitate writers we like. We, just like
Hmm.
in music, we echo that chord because we heard it in that thing, not to steal it, not to plagiarize, but actually to great to leader to greater inspiration. I think there's a big thing in music too. Correct me if I'm wrong, but nature abhors a vacuum. So there's nothing that comes out of isolation. We're all in conversation with each other. It's really this invisible thing, but once you feel it and you're in it, it is very playful at the end of the day, I think.
Yeah, playful. So tell me more about that. How is how has being a writer helped you in creative writing or journaling?
Yeah. 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 So I don't want to overshare, but I would say like
Well,
the
yeah, not too
greatest,
many details, but
the
just,
only,
general.
yeah, the only time that I've gotten an award for a poem was during like one of the worst heartbreaks of my life and writing a poem from great pain, right? So yeah, that wasn't very playful, but I guess the elements afterwards of like like during the editing stage, they're like, even when you're doing a poem, they're like, I'm going to constrict some of these rules here. I'm going to actually try to write with form because I'm kind of someone who doesn't write with form, and
Hmm.
being playful with like the images. And that also includes like, like kind of like in therapy too. Therapy is kind of an art. Like we might use metaphor to explain something or use a movie like an illusion, like Good Will Hunting or something. Like we're not just, we're a lot more. There's a theory in psychology called with Locke's tabula rasa, blank slate. And we're
Hmm.
not like that anymore, I don't think, as most counseling is. Like we're a lot more involved with our clients. It's more of a conversation, more of a collaboration process than like if you look at 50 years ago. And it's really benefited to more clients coming and more successful outcomes, I'd say. So I think some of the same issues are here, but we're having more conversations. And I think we can be playful. We don't have to be so professional all the time. And that goes for art too. It's like content creation is about the lack of play. Like you have to create something every single day or else you're not going to be successful. It's very freelancy, right? But I
Hmm.
think if you just write to write, um, write to exist, write the way we have to, like kind of like, Robin Williams' character in Dead Poet Society, like he's like, we write to like breathe or basically something like that. And it's not something that's overly complicated if you think about it. At its most simplicity, at its most simple core, it is, I would say, just kind of like a dance. Just like there's play, I would say there's playfulness in dance as well, and those kinds of like visual art forms. Whereas this is more, you're all intents and purposes asking a reader to hallucinate their own impressions on the page of the language you're putting across. That's why, just like with clients and counseling, there's a very obscure thing you're getting, and or there could be a very transparent, direct thing you're getting. Just like in writing, like there's different styles. So there's a very minimalist style, very direct. There's a very obscure poetic style to it. Opaque is the word I meant to use. Translucent would be somewhere in the middle. Just like with having conversation with clients as a therapist is like, you used a really beautiful phrase here, but not quite sure what it means. That'd be like very abstract, right? But then you want to use these concrete details, like the flower is love. That's a really terrible concrete detail, but that's a an example of using concrete details to make the abstract like more you and more what you mean there.
Okay, yeah, I like that. There's a lot of metaphor there, a lot of good knowledge. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so writing, just I don't know, give us some of your thoughts and facts. I saw you do a presentation on
Yeah.
it. Give us some of like the
Yeah.
nitty-gritty facts before we choose our new direction.
Yeah, for sure. So the triangle of like, which is kind of interesting because in counseling we have that Abraham triangle. So like we have a
The
triangle in
Maslow's
writing called,
hierarchy of needs is what you
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay, so let's
Yes,
go with
yeah,
the
so
writers.
sorry.
Let's go with the writers
Yes.
triangle. Yeah.
The audience, purpose, context. So we all get tripped up, I think, when we have writer's
Audience,
block and
purpose, and
audience,
context.
because
How do you put that? Because people can't see us. So how would you what would be in the basement and then up and up and up in the triangle? What
I
would you start with?
believe, yeah, purpose should be in the basement, but context is kind of like on the side, like the hypotenuse, right? But I think there is something to be communicated there. But the first thing is writing is a thing you do in a room, so it's between you and you. You write for you first. Worry about audience later, maybe in the editing stages. But that's why so many get tripped up in, okay, I have the thing. What do I do with the thing now? Do I take it to workshop? Do I throw it away? Do I continue? Do I keep it just for me? Do I do I give this to the world? And what will the world do with it once it finds it? So
Hmm.
like that, but the actual process, I think, is what you're getting at, is that actual shitty first draft. And sorry, I don't know if I'm supposed to swear on your show, Paul,
It's
but
okay.
that just getting it out, right? Just get it done, right?
Yeah.
And that could be a paragraph, that could be a page, or if you want to go full length novel, 300. But um, I would do this terrible thing of like, if you want to know about my recursive processes, I would write by hand and like almost hieroglyphs. And that would take, there was one point where a 350-page book took me an entire year to type up, which was, I would not recommend that to anyone. That's very torturous. So if you can use a computer, the lockdown browser is probably a lot easier. But I
Mm.
think if you do write by hand, there is something to be said about that. Or a typewriter, there is some beauty, or like, it's just going to be a lot easier, I would say. But I think there is this recursive process. You have to do it. It's a recursive process. Are you writing circuitously? Some people do bullet points, especially that's helpful if you're doing outlines for a novel. But there's all different types of editing as well. But the first things first is writing. And sometimes it's a completely different thing. There's this idea of killing your darlings. That Ernest Hemingway was big on, and so was Raymond Carver. And a lot of these minimalist writers, would there'd be no darlings. So the thing that you started with is not what you ended with whatsoever. And then
So
usually
how
if
do
you
you
take it to
kill your
trade
darling? So
publishing,
you write and you're attached to your writing, but you've got to kill it to make it better for the reader. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, yes, you have to let go of that beautiful poetic phrase. You have to let go of that image that like brought you to tears. You have to, and that's aptly named, right? That editing stage is called something so brutal. I don't. He was kind of a brutal writer, I think, but in
Hmm.
that sense of like very tortured himself. But I think there is something to be said about you can keep your darlings. I think it just depends on what you're trying to go for there. That's all later. I mean, you don't have to curate every single thing. That'd be exhausting. I
Hmm.
think the importance is that, right, what I was supposed to bring it back to what the theme is all about is, well, how is this benefiting the person? So I think it is benefiting the person because you're in conversation with something. And I always bring up that social domain too, of like that workshop. If you can get in a workshop with your friends, or if you can kind of even just getting that feedback of like, it's usually going to be very kind. I think it's also helpful and constructive as well to get that's a good example. The top of the pyramid audience is your friends, people that are supportive and care about you. But as I always say, a writer's workshop is a good microcosm of group therapy. I don't know if you agree, Paul, but yeah,
Tell
so
me
you
more
get all
about
the
that.
four
Tell me more
stages.
about how.
Yeah, you get the
And did we get to the
storming, you
top
get
real
the
quick? The top of the pyramid is what? Just so my brain goes there.
audience, just audience. So like
Audience.
kind of
Okay.
like being on the shelves of like it could be from the shelves, it could be the people at your slam poetry contest. Like
Right.
there is some level of obscurity there of like if I tend to write like a bit confusingly in my first draft, and that's what the workshop's for. It's like, hey, I really like this phrase, but I don't know what it means. I don't know what it's there for. They're just a little confused by me. So I think that's really helpful. Is like you can write really fine sentences. Sentence planning is a very cognitive thing too. And I think a lot of times we get tripped up and we make the sentence too opaque, and some people write it very clearly, and I think sometimes we understand it quite literally, right? It's very some of the greatest art is very simple, but
Hmm.
yeah. So and then I got us with that one. What was that last piece of that? It was just at the top. Yeah, I think that's audience for sure, but
So
that's where a lot of us live for sure.
yeah. So tell me about the writers' workshop being like group therapy.
Oh yeah, yes, that's where I got us off track of some of my executive stuff. So yeah, so definitely with that, I feel like getting people together, right? Whether it's in a social setting or like, like I do a karaoke thing, but like people just kind of getting together and this idea of getting very real feedback from people So in school, they do this like with creative writing, but it's a requirement. So it's a little bit different, like a lot of
Hmm.
like piggybacking off that and things like that. But you get, I think, probably the most real reactions depending on the kinds of writing friends you have. But then you wouldn't get, and a lot of people are getting ready for publication or potentially contemplating publication. But a lot of times people are just writing to express, and that's something that they're just curious on what people's thoughts are, and it storms like a group would, like any group dynamic would. So that's what I kind of meant by that. But I mean also because those raw reactions, I think that would also happen in a group therapy sense. We know the ends of group therapy and how effective, or like the boundless effects of those, and especially in those societies that have more billing for that. But it was covered in a previous podcast, I think. But
Oh yeah. Well, let's keep going. So,
yeah,
what are some favorite? Um, let's go with books and then works that you're working on.
yeah,
What are some favorite books that you have that have helped you learn maybe to write or express yourself in ways that you never thought possible?
yeah. I think a lot of writers like Craft. I think on writing is a great Craft book by Stephen King, and talking about his process. I think not everyone likes Stephen King. There's also I would very inspired by Ocean Vuong's work. I think he
Whose
breaks through
work?
that
Sorry, excuse me.
stereotype too. Ocean Vuong. It's spelled Vuong,
Okay.
but he wrote he's a poet, but he has gotten into like fictional works lately, and he's gone on Oprah and talked about the artist a little bit of like it's not a person just behind a door in a room, but a person who sees the world and is not apart from it. And I think that's so beautiful, that sense of like we are a part of the world as we're not, but you have to be in that room in order to create, but at the same time, who has the time to be in a room? Someone who commits himself to the room, unfortunately. But
Hmm.
once you do, there is a beautiful gem to be found there. It can be an isolating experience, it can be a disappointing experience, but it can also be a very evocative experience. And such is life. It's a reflection of life. Just like the therapy room is a microcosm of life. We always go on about that as therapists, that what's happening in the therapy room is a good reflection of what's happening outside of the therapy room as well.
Good. Yeah. So Ocean Vuong. Who are some other people that helped you kind of get into your creative self?
Maggie Smith,
Tell me
another
about
great
Maggie Smith.
poet. I think she writes, how would I say? she writes about nature in a way that is also about life, and it's like a good connection to there. I think a great poem that everybody should read is like it's about taking a house, like seeing a house and but like taking apart brick. But there's just a really good image in there. But there's also a series of I would say in a existentialist sense, there's a really good book called The Swerve That Changed My Life by Stephen Greenblatt,
Okay.
and he it definitely changed my worldview, and definitely recommend to readers as well. But
So is that a
yeah,
fiction book?
there's no, it's more nonfiction,
Okay.
unfortunately. Yes. So,
Oh, that's
like,
fine.
but even though couldn't necessarily be unfortunate, right? But I think I was actually just reading something about creative nonfiction the other day. That writer that I mentioned with the typewriter, and I kind of follow him, but he was saying in his of like why he writes nonfiction is this our whole argument is like, are we ever writing creative nonfiction,
Hmm.
or is it a fictional kind of because our memories are so faulty, we know that, but also like what is the difference really between fiction and nonfiction? Because fiction might come from a source of something very real as well, just like poetry could be either fictional or
Right.
nonfiction. When you
So
get
all
into
fiction is inspired
trouble,
by our lives and what's going on.
yes,
The story
right,
may
exactly,
be slightly different than what
loosely
happened in
based,
real life, and the timeline
hmm
accelerated or slowed down, but it is still
right.
interesting. So, yeah,
And I can get
I
excited
like
about
how
the
books.
proliferation of genre.
What's that?
And I can get too excited about the proliferation of genre. So sorry, I took us off track.
Oh,
I
that's
just love
fine. I just
genre
wanted to
so
know
much and
more
how
about some
genre
books
speaks to
people
each
should
other.
read.
And there's cross genre. There's like things that kind of speak to them definitely.
Well, genres are just things
They
that people
just
created to categorize books, right?
yes,
Like
exactly. Yeah,
a
there's
type of
no,
books.
and a lot of times they jump off each other. Sometimes there's cross genre, unblended genre. Like I've seen some poems that are like if you ever read Vive Francis is a Bivee, and then Francis, she wrote this book called Forest Primaval, and a lot of hers is so much white, the way white space is used and the way that words just jump off each other. Not everybody's cup of tea, but it's that movement of the language in poetry, which is often you think of poetry as lines together in stanzas, almost like a song, but to break all the rules, right, and just leave the town, as they say. Leaving the town is a big thing I learned in workshop too. Actually, college workshop is leaving the town is just turning a cliche on its head. It's getting away from the point, but we leave the town, we dream, and our dreams are sometimes not as big as they could be. So when you leave the town, you say fuck it to all the rules, and you just leave the town. You go say
Hmm.
goodbye to the rules, and I think
So,
that's just so beautiful.
yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a big thing you've been sort of saying throughout this is like it doesn't matter what you write, it's that you write. So making the
Yes,
space and the time to write can be therapeutic in and of itself, whether or
yeah,
not it ever
for
sees
sure.
rises to the audience level, right? You may never
Yeah,
show it to anyone. You may just write it on
yeah.
your own. I'm just
Could I
going to
share
name a few
one
writers
last
that,
anecdote about
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, so like I'll always remember my last day in workshop because I was actually feeling a bit pessimistic that day, and it was my last advanced. I was a senior in college. I thought, okay, what's going to happen? The college bubble's about to burst, and he was saying, if you do want to do this, you can do it while working. And he was saying, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he was saying, some people get up at 6 a.m. before their day job, for their 9 to 5, and I was like, are we actually going to? I raised my hand, like, are we actually going to do that? And I was curious because a classmate was like, I think you need hope. And I was thinking, like, okay, this is actually going to happen. And then once touching base with some of these people, like, they are doing that. They are keeping a day job, or like whether it's bartending or serving, because it's a very like grueling thing. Like, if you're going to be a writer, you're also like full time, like, you're also going to be required to have in a capitalist society to have a day job and do all these things. And then I think of the Goodwill Hunting example of Robin Williams of like he was a writer, but he was also a therapist. And those are two very demanding things. So if you take one or the other, right, you might need a sabbatical at some point to really commit yourself, right? And that's something to think about is like it's not it's a craving and it's something that we actually have to do. I actually have to do it. I'm once a writer, always a writer. I have to do it for my health. But not everybody needs that, is what I'm saying. It's not always extreme, but I do think we know there are a lot of mental health benefits, which I want to wrap it into is like and I think it's that expression piece is what I come down to. And that's the beauty I'm kind of referencing.
Expression, creativity, just experimentation,
Yeah.
freeness. You're not like
Yes.
consuming, you're outputting, which a lot of people don't
Right.
experience because, I don't know how to play an instrument. I don't know how to sing. I don't know how to do a
Yeah,
certain
for
sort of
sure.
sport. I don't know how
Yeah.
to, make
A lot of
crafts.
no's, a lot
So
of
it's like
limits.
people
Right.
feel
Yeah.
like they don't have these skills, so they can't do anything. And what I find about writing is if you know how to read and write, and I hope you're privileged enough to do so, that
Yes, of
that you
course.
don't have to be good at writing to write. You can
Yeah,
just
and it's
write.
it's cheap, it's accessible, it's most
Right.
inexpensive intervention you could ever use, right? And you don't have to be present with the client to do the intervention. It's cheap, and not in the sense of cheap dopamine. I mean, it's literally cheap, which we need in a society where like libraries are free and all these things. So it's
Right.
it's cheap to it's very inexpensive, it's very accessible, and it's cheap and accessible.
And
I
one
would
thing
say
I'd
so
like to
you can.
point out about reading and writing, so writing can change your perspective, but reading can really change your perspective. I found
Yeah,
I've been reading two very different authors lately just for fun.
that's awesome.
I read a lot of self-help, of course, and psychology, but
Right.
you've got to you've got to take a break from that sometimes when you're in our field.
Yeah,
So I actually
of
found an
course,
author
of
I
course.
really find
It's
really interesting.
relatable.
Her name's Laura Van Den Berg. Laura Van Den Berg. And she's a really interesting writer, and her perspective is very deep and interesting and unpredictable. And she writes about a lot of
That's what I
women
like.
characters so far. But one of the short
Okay.
stories collections I just read was called "What the World Will Look Like When All the Water Leaves Us," and it's a very good short story collection. I found it very intriguing and just different than what I would think. So it was interesting because she's writing about all these things that I've never experienced. I've never been a woman. I've never each story took a place in a different place and a different, like one story there was a young woman, and another story was in New York, an older person.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
Places I never lived, things I never experienced, but it made me think about my life creatively. Um, I also found a comedy author. His name is Richard Ayoade, and he is was in the IT crowd. That's what he's famous for. He's an actor too.
Awesome.
But he writes like
I gotta write some of these
hilarious.
down, Paul.
He writes hilarious commentary, and he's this British
Yeah.
guy, and he lives in England. And Richard
That's
Ayoade,
another
he's
thing with
really
play, like
funny.
David Sedaris, that kind of comedic writing.
Yes,
It's like stand-up comedy in the page, which is so cool to
exactly.
experience these things and that
That's it.
hallucination of like us experiencing it.
It's a good experience. Yeah, a good comparison is David Sedaris, the American satirist, but Richard Ayoade is very similar,
Yeah.
and he's
Oh, and a lot of other people have
satirizing
changed
British
my
culture.
life. Among the other people who changed my life, like George Saunders was my favorite author for a long time. Very absurdist writer, very much like that. And I wanted to say, like, writing's not a jealous God, so I'll always be there. If like you do, I do feel a little rusty when I don't write for a long time, but it's not a jealous God. Like it's there for you when you want to come back to it. And I think that's so helpful. It's not like an absolutist thing, like you have to reach this goal. It's like something that's a resource and something another tool under your tool belt as well. That's this being human, right?
And all it
And
takes is
it's
trying. And then what we say is, I think in writing, there are no mistakes, right? You just do
right,
it.
exactly.
So, what's
No work is
something
ever finished, merely abandoned.
you don't have to tell us
That's what.
what you're, personally writing, but
Mhm.
I would ask, are you and your writer friends all working on works? Do you kind of hold each other accountable? What do you do there?
Yeah, yeah. I think we get a lot of group chats. We get a lot of things going to get us there, and there's definitely like that consistency there of like I wouldn't be writing right now if I didn't have that social accountability. So I think that's really helpful as well, and that feedback and that fun thing afterwards that we do of like singing and stuff. So I think it's just a huge combination of getting that very real feedback that's very helpful and constructive in that sense of those people that you're with are going to tell you honestly, right? And not tell you for a grade. And it's also a really good use of time as well and energy. And what we work on could be plays, it could be, scripts, it could be poems and fiction, short stories as well. And I think I encourage anybody who's writing out there to find that group because it's whether it's people you know, people you trust, and people that's supportive. But no work is ever finished, merely abandoned, right? So we choose to publish things, and that's William Faulkner quote. So I don't plagiarize, but don't want to do that on air. But we step away from work, right? And it's exhausting when we do, but we eventually do decide it's ready, but it's not totally finished. Just like language, it's never no sentence is ever finished. We get the last word. We talk to people, we feel things, but we're not totally done. Like we're just being human as a process, just like therapy and counseling and change as well.
Okay, well, I like that. It's all a process.
Yeah.
It's, changes you. It can be changing. It's accessible. It's right there. And I guess I also heard some advice. I don't know if you said, but you can look for writers' workshops. You can look for other people writing, maybe on
Yeah.
meetup.com or other places that people
Yes.
gather,
I've used
local
Meetup myself. I found
bookstores.
a nonfiction group
Oh,
myself on
I didn't
Meetup,
even
so
know
it's a
that. Okay.
fantastic, and
Yeah.
I recommend that to clients routinely in a solution focus aspect of like, hey, if you're reporting these instances of loneliness, and Meetup's a really good resource for people in your area or Facebook groups of events going on, for
Yeah.
sure.
And
So
a lot of
that's
local
can't recommend that enough.
bookstores, a lot of independent bookstores have a lot of, so independent bookstores you can find on bookshop.org, a huge
Mhm.
list. Plus, you can use the internet to find them. But a lot of them have meetups and different book clubs. So maybe you're not interested in
Yeah,
writing yet. You want to dip your toes in, become part of a
for
book
sure.
club where you read a book and talk
Yeah,
about it. That can be a
yeah.
segue into writing as well. So, yeah, Nick, it's
Can't
been a
recommend that
pleasure
enough either.
talking to you. Go ahead. Yeah, what were you
Hmm.
saying?
And no, I said can't recommend that enough. And you were talking earlier about perspectives or identities you don't necessarily share, and I feel the same way when I read other people of different identities. That helps expand my empathy exams as well. There's a great book called The Empathy Exams by K. Redfield Jameson, and that's an interesting thing. Or not? No, the K. Redfield Jameson did. It was actually her aunt, her niece wrote this one. So it's kind of interesting because I don't know if you know about William James and Henry James. One's a writer, one was a renowned psychologist. So I think this meeting, this marriage of writing and counseling, in my opinion, has been around since the inception because people relate. There's famous writers, psychologists related to each other. I think there's this marriage, right, of counseling and writing and art. And I think that we can't separate it. And that's what I wanted to say. There's a lot of data in our field, but there's a lot of data to come. So a lot of this is work is experiential. It depends on the individual. Some of the biggest scientific claims don't end up necessarily being supported. And that's okay. It's like we just kind of experience things. So I always say counseling's half science, half art, right? In that sense of that marriage, right? And marriage is a strong word, but I really believe in that sort of connection for sure between the two things, between the
Absolutely.
two worlds.
I think that's great. So I would just say to listeners out there, check out the episode again. If you have any questions, you can re-listen to it. Check out some of the resources we're going to put in the show notes, and
Yeah,
find a
for sure.
local bookstore, find a local writers group, get involved, and see how literature can change your life. And it's a lot different than watching television. I
Yeah,
think watching
so
television,
different.
watching YouTube, watching the internet is so boring. It
It's
gets
true.
old.
It tells you what to think. Yeah.
It tells you what to think. You don't use your imagination.
And that's why I
And
say hallucination. It's not
right.
something psychiatric as a malady. I mean, you are literally you guys, you are visualizing. You are like
Yeah.
you're doing that work, five senses work through words. Think of it, just letters. And because if you're well read, if you're literate, if you're able to, you can literally, and hopefully you don't have dyslexia because that'd be sometimes a terrible experience, but maybe you do
Well,
Audible. And then
audiobooks.
yeah,
Audiobooks.
Audible. You could always do two
I love
speed to get through a lot of them.
audiobooks. Or
Got through
Libro.fm.
Dostoevsky.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Libra is awesome. I think Schuler actually partners with them.
Yeah, they
So
do.
that's super cool. And I took up a lot of time, but I think that is exactly what I wanted. It's that beauty in that conversation for sure. And it's very
Absolutely.
accessible.
Well, thank you, Nick, for being on the
Thank you so
podcast. We
much,
really
Paul. Thank you
appreciate
for
your
having me.
time. Nick is on the internet. You can find him, Nick Kondyles. How do you say it? I can't remember.
Yes, you got it. You killed it. You killed
Nick
it. You got
Kondyles.
it.
He's a therapist. He's a
Yeah.
writer. Look for his, maybe your works and he published at some point. So if it's not, it's fun for fun. If it is, we'll find it.
Thank you enormously, Paul. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
All of these comforts, all of these lies and fire pit philosophies, hoping for answers, talking with God. Stepping through tide pools, barefoot old oak stretched to the sunlight, skulls in the sandstone, lay down on the moss.
And there you have it. This has been another episode of the Intentional Clinician Podcast. If you are enjoying the show, please leave us a rating on iTunes or share the show with people you know. I would surely appreciate it. As some of you know, I am passionate about preventing future violence in the United States. I have started a nonprofit with colleagues called the National Violence Prevention Hotline, which is a 501c3 organization. We are endeavoring to gain funding and collaborators and volunteers so that we can start a 24/7 hotline and chat line to reach potential perpetrators before they may act violently. It is a bold effort to curb violence and save innocent lives by working to connect with potential offenders while they are in the planning stages of violence, help to de-escalate them, and provide resources so that they can get appropriate professional help. The National Violence Prevention Hotline is looking to open up a conversation about violence in society, the causes, and the solutions. You can learn more by visiting our website at violencepreventionhotline.org. You can get involved by writing your congressperson from our website, sharing it with your network, or even donating to the cause. If you are looking for an EMDR International Association consultant, I am a consultant and I can help provide 20 hours that you need to become EMDRIA certified. Just check out the show notes and send me a message and see if we're a good fit to work together. If you are in need of counseling, do not hesitate to make an appointment with a local counselor in your area. You can also make an appointment with the excellent clinicians at Health for Life Counseling in Grand Rapids as part of the Trauma Informed Counseling Center of Grand Rapids by visiting www.healthforlifegr.com. And if you are in the state of Michigan, you can also schedule a telehealth appointment. The recording you just listened to consists of the personal opinions of Paul Krauss and his guest, and while these are based upon the literature they have read and the experience in their respective fields, the information on this podcast should not be viewed or thought of as the definitive opinion on any subject. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for treatment. If you're in a crisis, please call 911 or the National Crisis Line at 988. Support your local bookstore by shopping at bookshop.org. That's www.bookshop.org. It donates a percentage of sales to local bookstores all across the United States, which I think gives character to our cities and a place to hang out and a place to explore. You can order from the comfort of your own home online while supporting businesses near you. If you are a therapist and you are not involved in your local counseling or therapist or social work organization, please get involved to at least pay dues so that we can have lobbyists help keep mental health care accessible at the government level, and also expanding into schools and other places that need it. And also, if you didn't know, counseling organizations and professional organizations are working to keep us from becoming gig workers for a lot of large corporations who are coming in and trying to buy up local counseling agencies or basically pay you what they pay for people to deliver food to your house. So, get involved. Until next time on The Intentional Clinician, I wish you all a safe and peaceful week.